Hi, this is Linda Groundwater, official biographer of Bob Crane and co-author of Bob Crane, The Definitive Biography. On June 29, 1978, Bob Crane was brutally murdered, and to this day, 42 years later, the crime remains officially unsolved. His unsolved murder and the scandal that grew from it have spawned unending media coverage, along with several books, documentaries, podcast episodes, and the movie Autofocus, all of which provide much fodder but little clarity about Bob Crane as a human being. In part 2 of this 2-part episode, co-Bob Crane biographer Carol Ford and I continue our conversation about Bob's murder and the sex scandal that followed, in a way you've never heard it told before. We continue our discussion of Autofocus, including the reconstructed scene from Celebrity Cooks and Bob Crane's very last media interview from June 27, 1978. This is Flipside, the true story of Bob Crane.
This is Carol Ford. Welcome back. We pick up here following the clips from Arlene Martell, Johnny and Pam Thompson, Harvey Geller, Leo McElroy, and Bruce Bilson, which can be found in part 1 of this episode.
As you can hear from what these people are saying, this film and its inaccuracies as far as the Bob Crane that they knew actually hurt them. It was painful for them because to them, these things were not A, the Bob that they knew personally, or B, they found to be outright lies. And certain inaccuracies, like we will discuss Celebrity Cooks, the whole idea of John Carpenter being terribly important to him. And one other thing that Schrader actually said, which was that, and I think Harvey Geller said it, Crane had no friends. Those kinds of things, which are just, and it would get bleeped out of a radio station, but, absolute rubbish for lack of being able to say what I really think of it. Those kinds of inaccuracies for people who don't know or didn't know Bob, those things color a person's perception of him entirety. They color their perceptions of everything that he's done, everything that he says, every move that he makes career-wise or in person. There's a part of Autofocus where Carpenter and Bob are having some kind of argument, and he says, I'm just like Ann and Patty. You find someone better and you dump me. Well, none of that was true, but those kinds of things, that was their perception that they wanted to put out about him. And that's how the public will pick up something that is purported to be an auto pic, an auto bio. Those things that are supposed to be people taking someone's life. You're not supposed to take liberties with someone's life. Just because he's not here to defend himself doesn't mean that you have a right to turn him into something he wasn't because it makes better theater. Well, clearly it didn't make better cinema because it flopped. And it flopped because none of those characters was sympathetic.
That's right.
Carpenter wasn't likable. Bob wasn't likable. None of the other characters were likable. It was a disaster. But Bob's name was attached to it, and people, I saw that film. Wasn't he terrible? Hey, you saw that film. The film was terrible. The book that it was based on was inaccurate, and the film was awful. Yes. And make that your perception of Bob is wrong. And that is why our book exists. Autofocus's primary place in my life is that it made the beginning of this project immensely difficult. Nobody wanted to talk to me because everybody who saw it, who was part of Bob's life, felt completely burnt and trusted no one. And they all said that it was because it was so full of lies and so full of distortions and so full of betrayal to things that they had shared that got twisted and changed. Yes. That when it came to somebody like me, followed by somebody like you and Dee coming along and saying, we want to do the right thing. They went, well, sorry. Those people said they wanted to do something good too. So the only place that Autofocus has in my life is one of complete disdain for twisting reality and making our job so much harder, to the point where people come and say to us, you don't know anything because he was all about sex. Hey, how about you didn't realize, but he wasn't all about sex?
That's right.
How about you didn't realize, but here's the rest of his life instead? That's my soapbox, and I'm coming off it now.
But you know what, though? It is so important to say, and it's important for people to understand that if you're going to judge somebody with as much information as you can possibly get from that person. It doesn't mean that you have to automatically fall in love with that person, and it doesn't mean that you have to hate that person. But if you're going to base an opinion, and make sure you have facts that are corroborated and that are true, and B, make sure you have enough of them. One of the reasons why our book is so long is because we had to spend a lot of time addressing what wasn't true and then correcting it with what was true, and then adding the corroboration. You know, at the time that we were investigating this and researching it and then writing it, and then when it came out, nobody knew who we were. We're just average.
None of the people we
talked
to knew who we were.
We have families, we have day jobs, you have a son, I have my own family. We all have stuff going on. This is not our only thing that we do. And so people didn't know who we were, and we certainly didn't have the credentials of some big shot Hollywood producer / director / actor, And so, it did make it more difficult for us to establish ourselves. However, what we found out when we interviewed all these people, 200 plus, is that they corroborated each other. It got to the point that in the beginning, when we would go on these phone calls, it was, oh gosh, what are we going to hear? And then it was, oh yeah, okay, here we go again. He's great again, which was lovely. We had very few that had strong opinions against him, but overall it was this mass corroboration. And it was important to show that from these people, because you and I, we did not know him. We cannot make a personal judgment or opinion on Bob because we never met him, we never knew him. But now we have this army of people who did know him, who did love him, who did work with him, and who were friends with him, who are telling us repeatedly how, their thoughts on him and how good of a human being he was. And so it was very important to put that in there. It's important to the telling of his life story to make sure that corroboration is there, because in previous works it hadn't been. And that's how things got skewed off on a tangent to come to a place where Bob Crane is this two-dimensional cartoon character who has no depth. He's just something to laugh at. And that's what we were fighting up against.
And the other part of it here, too, is that, when you look at, let's say, here we'll say autofocus, but that has a whole different life of its own. But partly autofocus and partly every other article that came out after he died, in every scandal sheet or whatnot, is the book that we wrote is not the book that we wanted in terms of, I'm only looking for good stuff. We're not avoiding the bad stuff. There just isn't as much of it as people tend to think. And it isn't as big as a part of his life as people want to think. The truth and the information determine the story. What we set out to do, what I remember saying when I went online, and if you read my foreword or whatnot in the book itself, it's not fair. Why doesn't anybody know this? Why doesn't anybody know that? But we set out, as you said, what are we going to hear from these people? Gosh, what are they going to say? What are they going to say? We went to 200 plus people to try and get a whole story. Now, whatever information we got, that led to the story that is in that book. It might not be the big scandal sheet that some people are looking for. It might not be the, isn't he a terrible guy? Wasn't he a monster story that people have heard? But that's because that's not the truth. The truth is what creates the story. And that's not to put us on pedestals. That's to just say, this book was written with the integrity of people who said, we will tell the truth. whatever that truth is. And if the truth happens to be that he was a nice guy with a problem, and going way back into the last hour when we were talking about, yeah, he's a guy who happened to have a lot of sex, and are we condoning that he did it all while he was married? No. But we're not here to judge what he did. We're just here to tell you his story. And there's that difference again between this book and some of the other things that have been out there that we still see people that call themselves fans of his, not fans of the shows, because shows are shows, but they're saying, I'm a Bob Crane fan, and wasn't he a randy old soul? Well, yeah, but there's more to it than that. And I'm not going to pretend to know what was in his mind, because I was never in his mind. And I never met him to spill his guts to me. But the story we got from everybody that knew him is just to say that we are telling the story without judgment, but we are telling you the story as it was told to us by all these people who knew him. We are telling you the story, as you said, to correct a lot of the other things which were judgmental in their inaccuracy. Their inaccuracy actually made it judgmental. They presumed that he was insecure about his schooling, that he was best friends with John Carpenter, that he was chasing everything in a skirt. None of that's true. Did he chase women? Seems to. Did women come straight to him? You bet. Ed Beck said he was one of the most charismatic men he'd ever seen. People just walk into a room and flies to flypaper. And is that good and bad for him? Yes. Are we judging it? No. We're telling you the effect of it, because that's what it was. And the truth should lead to the story. You don't have a story and then look for facts to back it up.
Right.
You find out what the facts are and you write the story. And that's why the inaccuracies of things like autofocus, the stories from Jeff Erdell about celebrity cooks that were then quoted in autofocus, that then went on to the film, that then people then believed, all of that colored everything that people thought about Bob. And it was just so painful, as you said, to go through over and over again and have to say, look, we're not just out to make all these people sound like they were incompetent. We spoke to the people at Celebrity Cooks thinking that they were going to back up that story.
I remember you telling me after we did 3 interviews with, just so people could know, we did 3 separate interviews with the folks from Celebrity Cooks.
Yeah.
We talked with Derek Smith, who was the owner. We talked with Ann Kerr, who was the talent agent. We talked with Roger Packer, who was the stage manager. And later on, I did a blog post over on voteforbobcrane.blogspot.com back in 2015 about all of this. And I include some excerpts from the book. But we got a 4th person who we did not interview, but who corroborated the entire blog post, Ron Goldman, who reached out and said exactly right from another person present at the taping. So when we reached out to the Celebrity Cooks people, and Celebrity Cooks was produced in Canada, in Vancouver, throughout the 1970s, we reached out to them because what we wanted to know why Bob Crane, who seemed to have been always able to control these sorts of things in his professional life, when he was on the air, when he was on TV, when he was working, he could control this piece of it. We wanted to know why, when it was so easy for him to, or I shouldn't say easy, but when he seemed to be capable of doing that in other settings, why on Celebrity Cooks this came to an explosive event. Because in this particular episode, he is accused, or it is said, that he had all of this inappropriate dialogue with the audience. He talked about death. He talked about his separation with Patty. And all of these things just come spilling out in a very inappropriate, very obtuse, very ugly way, to the point where at some point he cries. He's just very unstable. If this were somebody that you were at work with and saw this behavior, you would be very uncomfortable. You would be very concerned for the person's well-being. You would be a little bit like, oh, I don't know that I want to engage with that person. If it's a one-time thing or if it's something that is a coworker or something, you would not want to engage with that person, or you might want to think that person needs some help. And so this has been like etched in stone, absolutely happened because of how it was presented in Graysmith's book, The Murder of Bob Crane, and then went on to be shown in autofocus in a scene, in a very detailed scene in autofocus. Mm. So that being said, this all stems from, not from Robert Graysmith, who interviewed anybody. This goes back to an article that was published in September of 1978, The Hollywood Reporter. And it is a very long article about Bob's appearance on Celebrity Cooks. And what happened was Bob was murdered on June 29th. Celebrity Cooks had been in production for a couple years up to that point. Bob taped his episode at the end of January in 1978. It was broadcast in Canada several times, and it aired during what they would call the family time, when kids would be home from school, the wife would be making dinner. It was like that 3, 4, 5 o'clock slot in the afternoon. So it was on during a time when kids would be watching. It aired several times, and it was going to start in syndication on July 10th, 1978 in the United States. And after Bob's murder on June 29th, very quickly, Jeff Erdell, who was a network representative for a television network in New York, said that he needed to pull it. It was going to be one of the first episodes to air in syndication for Celebrity Cooks. And he says that things about death just kept cropping up all throughout the show. You know, it struck me so ironic when I heard he was dead. I didn't know that there were serious overtones. But he makes all these death jokes. He says, I'm no psychologist, but there were just too many that involved death. And so he makes the decision. He also goes on to say that Bob's conversation was loaded with innuendo and jokes about sex, and that Bob whiplashed from despair about separation and impending divorce from Patty to enthusiasm about his swinging sex life. And so because of all of this, he goes and he pulls the episode from syndication in the United States because it made him feel weird. He didn't like it. He thought, So we, Linda, you and I, we set out to interview people from the show, very, very prominent people from the show. And I remember afterwards, you saying to me in one of our follow-up calls that you were very happy that the calls went the way they did and that we now had the true story. But that in a way, in a journalist kind of way, not that you wished anything bad on Bob, but as a journalist, if it had happened and then we had gotten the story from these individuals as to why he had these breakdowns and these moments, it would have made for a better story. It would have made for a meatier story, a juicier story. And it didn't happen. And I'm not saying...
And that's exactly what I was talking about before. The reality makes the story, not the other way around. Because I also remember that I had a lot of questions about this, thinking, because it would have explained things. It would have, everybody's life is a mystery, and it would have explained things better. And I remember that you go into an interview with a blank, hopefully prepared, prepared and with some questions based on what you believe that you know. And in this case, we had Erdell's article because there was no video. There's a little bit of video now. If you look it up on YouTube and you put Celebrity Cooks plus Bob Crane, you'll just find the joke about the two cannibals having dinner. And one cannibal says, I can't stand my mother-in-law. And the other one says, well, just eat your peas, which is like one of my favorite jokes of all time. And you could see that everybody was having a good time, but there was no video at that time. And you went with what you thought you knew. And I remember having to just scramble when all I was getting was, nope, no, that didn't happen. Oh, crap. Okay, well, not that I wanted it to happen, but what I thought I knew and what I had prepared for was the idea that somebody had actually told the truth. And when not only Derek Smith, but everyone else was saying, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. And the YouTube video actually has a section saying that the people who put it up have said that they agreed that the clip from autofocus was more imagination than reality. May have been intended for dramatic effect, but according to 5 people who were there that day in close contact with Bob, the audience enjoyed his time in the studio. The crew found him to be charming. It was complete and without edits. He was fine. And so I had to kind of scramble for the rest of the interview and go, okay, which actually as a reporter and interviewer, I actually find it invigorating. I now had to just fly by the seat of my pants and go, you know what? I now know what the story is. The story is that this article is wrong. Now I need to know what the truth is. Yes. How fantastic was that for me as a reporter? As in somebody who really liked to sink my teeth. I love interviewing people, love being surprised by what I find when I interview people. I recently interviewed a member of I'm going back to them again, but I recently interviewed a member of the New Monkeys, and people who are old enough will know that existed. And I always had a thing against them just in my head. And I had the most fascinating interview, learned so much, and had to do the whole thing by the seat of my pants because the answers I got were completely different from what I expected. That was the case here. I went in with a series of questions, which I think I still have a list of in my computer somewhere, based on what I believed Bob's behavior was during that show, and to be told that the entire thing was wrong. And not only was it wrong, but it was then spread. It wasn't just that one article by Jeff Verdell. That's right. It was spread into Autofocus, the book. It was spread into Autofocus, the movie. And it then became part of that urban legend of look what he did. Look who he is. Look what, and that colored people's perception about him to the point where then you see, look, I'm just flipping around on the internet now, check out the movie Autofocus. It's a well-made peek into the sordid secret life of Bob Crane. Well, no, it's actually not. And so I had to take the time to say, it's actually full of inaccuracies and outright fallacies. But you know what? People don't want to be told that they're wrong. They don't want to be told that those bad things are wrong.
Yes. And what I find incredibly fascinating is that this article, so that the reporter of this article, who wrote the article, who interviewed Jeff Verdell spilling all of this stuff about there were suggestive remarks, there were this, there was that, there were all these women, balloons, he was like, just completely inappropriate. And as you remember, Linda, all of the people that talked to us said they could have just stopped. I mean, to the people at Celebrity Cooks, Bob is the guest coming in. He's not the owner of Celebrity Cooks. He's no one of any power within the Celebrity Cooks community. He is a star. He is a celebrity. He is someone that people will recognize from Hogan's Heroes. So they're hoping that as he comes on the show, he's going to be an audience magnet. They're going to have people watch the show because they love Hogan's Heroes, they love Bob Crane, and so their advertisers are going to have a wider audience watching the show, watching that episode. So that's their goal with getting Bob Crane or any of their guests, star celebrity guests, to come on, because it's a draw. You want the audience to see somebody that they like, that they relate to. But Bob himself had no power within Celebrity Cooks. So if he comes into this setting and starts behaving completely badly, completely inappropriately, talking, horrendous things to the audience is awkward, everybody feels weird, they just say, okay, no, we're done. They stop film, they stop camera, they either just complete the episode and then shove it, or they just stop it altogether, or if they want to try and salvage it, they stop tape. And then they say, okay, let's wait for him to collect himself. And then they go forward. And then, okay, we got to stop tape again. And as you recall, there was just one other person that they had a problem with, that they actually said they had a problem with. And it wasn't that they thought Bob was bad, but there was one person who was an alcoholic who came, I think, to the thing drunk. And so they had to work within that.
So I know they had instructions when that person
Yeah.
came.
Yes.
That they had to make sure there was no alcohol.
Right. That's right. That's correct. And so with Bob,
no alcohol.
if he's coming in to this setting to do a thing by their standards, he has to meet their standards or he's gone. So it's not like, you have to look at this pre-murder. You have to look at it as Bob as a paid employee coming in to do a job for a client, that if he doesn't meet his end of the bargain, they're not going to keep him. They're going to tell him to take a hike. They don't care that he's Bob Crane. They don't care. They want their show to have integrity. And what they ended up telling us was that he had loads of integrity, and he not only was a terrific guest, but he was one of their best guests, and that he was so good that they were leading off with his episode in the first run of the syndication in the United States. And when Jeff Erdell was talking to the reporter for Hollywood Reporter about all of these things that he finds eerie and weird and so on and so forth, the reporter did press him and say, well, tell me, give me some specifics. And he couldn't. And the reporter writes, he, meaning Jeff Erdell, he cannot come up with specific instances, but Erdell stands by his insistence that was definitely his impression in the screenings of the Crane segment. So what Jeff Erdell is saying is, I can't pinpoint it, can't give you examples, can't show you for yourself so that you can see, can't do anything to prove, but yeah, I felt really eerie, and what I'm saying is true.
Oh, I don't even understand, to be honest, how an article like that gets published. And I know this may sound like I'm some, righteous writer or whatever, but part of the reason that I don't do the work anymore is that it bothers me when that integrity disappears. What I see with Bob's life and his death, is that a lot of that integrity disappeared.
Yep.
In the telling of it, not in his own life, but in the media, in the telling of it, in the use of it. It is one thing for him to be a celebrity and for them to tell a story. There's a story there. I mean, when he was murdered, that's a story. His background, that was a story. But publishing a story that says, we were supposed to run it, but I couldn't. Well, why not? Well, because I don't know. I didn't like it. Well, why didn't you like it? Well, I don't know, but I didn't like it. That's not a story. And I've just gone and found that section in the book where it all falls apart for me here, where we say, because you published it in its entirety, and I'm horrified now that we actually asked this, but this was how this is actually an example, if you want to see how what I was talking about works, when the information creates the story and not the other way around. It's when you get to the section where I start talking to Derek Smith, who says, I'm happy to set this right because, there's so much that's wrong. So by that time, I already knew that there was some issue here, but I say to him, we talked about Grace Smith, and that the taping of the episode of Celebrity Cooks was always regarded as his life beginning to completely unravel. He couldn't hide his lifestyle. He was upset when he was on the air. He was distraught. He was very visibly distressed and obsessed with death and sex. Is that the experience you had? No, not at all. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So, what about, the CBS spokesman says that the show had this, this, and this. No, no, not at all. Not surprised. Well, because we did this, that's why they didn't show it. Didn't even show it. The only American station that did play the show was WCBS, and he's not talking about that show. He's talking about a whole bunch of them. And so the whole thing was wrong. And again, there's that whole idea of, why couldn't someone simply do a little research?
I remember because I would do like the pre-calls, and I would, talk with everybody, as before we would get on, and I would kind of secure the date and time and all that. And I remember talking with Ann Kerr, the talent agent. And I remember, Linda, you got so, not mad, you got miffed at me, because when I said to her, and of course I didn't record those calls, those calls were just pre-stuff,
Yes.
And I remember telling you that when I talked with Ann, and I said, Ann Kerr, And I said, okay, well, there's this all, blah, blah, blah about your show and his episode and, all of that. And just as we have been talking about just now. And her reaction on the phone to me was complete anger, like not towards me, but towards the fact that, I think she said the word no less than 20 times. No, 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 no. She was like, no. She couldn't say no enough, not know that she wasn't going to talk with us. No, that never happened. Like how she was so angry that not only was Bob put in this negative light, but celebrity cooks by extension was put in this negative light. And it was just so maddening. And I remember telling you, and you said, don't do that again. Make sure that when we're doing it, you wait for the interview. So we can get that on tape.
Got to get that on tape.
In that,
if you look at her section, there are sections where she just goes, no, not at all, no,
yeah.
no.
But it was
I can say categorically, no.
It was so
there was nothing. No.
It was such a raw emotion over the whole thing that it was like she was just livid that this happened. And Derek Smith told us that the National Enquirer came to him, talk with him about it, and he said, no, not going to do that. But aside from that, nobody, not this reporter with Jeff Erdell, not Robert Graysmith, not anybody from Autofocus, nobody reached out to them to corroborate what was going to happen next. Like, like we did. Did this happen? We were all set for, okay, it happened. Let's find out why. And it didn't. And so you've got this whole angry, and rightfully so, people, producer, photographer, stage manager, talent agent, who were there and who said, this is just absurd. And I remember, I think it was Roger Packer, the stage manager, who said to us, I cannot believe that, and it wasn't that Celebrity Cooks is little or anything like that, but this incident, which in the grand scheme of everything is small. And I'm saying that with all due respect, but they've turned this episode into this monstrous thing that has now taken on a life of its own as this, horribly defining moment of Bob Crane losing his mind, and it never happened.
Yeah. I don't see how an 8-hour segment of his life is worth pages and pages.
There you go.
Pages. He's also the one that told us about the alcoholic. And they did run it. They just had to make sure that they were told in advance that there was to be no alcohol anywhere in the dressing room on the set. There was usually alcohol on this. There was wine, dinner, and all that. None of that.
Dinner, correct.
None of that. But they just had to baby him a little bit. And that was said in the context of saying that they didn't need to do any of that with Bob.
Right.
Bob was fine. But by all means, let's have some guy make something up. I think it was Ann Kerr who said, I don't know, whoever this guy was thinking of, her saying this guy being Jeff Erdell, whoever he was thinking of, it wasn't Bob.
Mm-hmm.
Whoever he was thinking of, it wasn't Bob. And Roger had said he didn't believe that they spoke of his personal life at all, other than to say that he was married.
Mm-hmm.
This is my wife's recipe, I think is what he said, or something like that. That was it. That was the whole discussion.
To give you an idea of the type of people that Celebrity Cooks had on the show, they did usually 3 tapings in a day. And
Julia Child.
Julia Child was the episode that they taped before Bob. Then they taped Bob's show. And then Julia Child was the episode after Bob's show. Mm-hmm. So this wasn't some, rinky-dink operation like, it's something that nobody's watching. It was, at that point, people, like, again, you have to think of it as 1970s, not today, where you have the Food Network and you have all these different things that are geared toward food preparation. This was an era where Julia Child she was it. She was royalty in the kitchen, and she kind of paved the way for this type of a cooking show to become established and then to grow to where we see it today in some instances. And so Bob was sandwiched between 2 of her episodes, and that just goes to show you where they stood as a cooking show. They were doing light comedic fare while they prepared a dish. It was very informal. It wasn't scripted. It was just the host, Bruno Geruzzi, and Bob preparing, or whomever the celebrity guest was, preparing a dish. And a lot of times the humor came from that these are actors, not cooks. And they sometimes flubbed it. And so that kind of became funny. And the audience would laugh because things didn't get done the way they should get done in the kitchen, because they maybe know how to throw a burger on the grill, but they not necessarily know how to create restaurant style food. So that's where all of the humor kind of was anchored with the show. And it was supposed to be a very lighthearted, entertaining, funny, fun time for the host, for the guest, and then of course for the audience, and then of course for the television viewing audience. And that's what happened with Bob. And unfortunately, because he was murdered, somebody being Jeff Erdell, used it for 15 minutes of fame. And that's what it boils down to. And He got it. And the ironic thing is that people don't really realize where this all stems. And so he kind of literally only had 15 minutes of fame, but it took on a life of its own. And
as soon as it hit autofocus, that was the end of it. It became reality.
That's right.
Because autofocus was purported to be a biopic, which was using the life of Bob to sell cinema tickets, which it failed at miserably.
Yes.
And took his reputation down with it.
Yes.
And I have as you said, I have nothing against the actors, although I believe some of the actors do believe they are rather expert on their topic now, which is unfortunate because they believe that they are experts based on autofocus, and would be really neat to see what would happen if we sent some of those people this book.
I've had that conversation with my friends many times. Hey, Greg Kinnear, if you're listening, I will send you a copy of this book free of charge. You betcha. I am quite happy to do so.
Maybe learn a little different. But I have nothing against the actors.
Sure.
This is their job. Pick up a script and do something with it. And it's not their job even to judge the reality of it, as in whether are they supposed to go, unless they knew Bob personally, which I don't believe most of those people did. And if they did, it might have been just a passing meeting for most of them, if not all of them, that it's not their job to determine the truth or untruth of the piece. It's their job to present it. But for everyone else involved in that film, shame on them.
That's right.
The person who wrote it, the person who directed it, and knew it was a lie, and said it was a lie, and yet that film, because let's face it, film becomes reality. What a horrible person he is. Well, sorry, that doesn't make our book incorrect. Our book is so well researched. I challenge someone to go through all of the sources that we've gone through and find where we have taken this stuff out of context, where we have taken these quotes out of context, where we have told the wrong story. They can't. We spent too many years getting it right.
Yes.
And finding the right publisher, God bless him, who allowed us to tell the story as the story is.
Yes.
That's the other part we haven't really discussed, and we don't really need to go into it in great detail, but this publisher allowed us to tell the story the way we wanted to tell the story, which is to say, it is the truth as we know it, all of it.
I have to say, our publisher, Mike Aloisi, who is the owner of AM Inc. Publishing. When the book was published, it was Author Mike Inc., and he has had a name change from that to AM Inc. Publishing. Mike is completely on board with us and everything that we're doing. I mean, as a publisher, and I work for a publishing company, not Mike's company, but I work for a healthcare publishing company, and very quickly I will tell you that as a publisher, it obviously costs money to publish books. And Mike has a final say in as far as what gets published, because he wants to sell books. This is his bread and butter. He's very supportive of what we're doing, but at the end of the day, he's got to put food on the table. So he wants to publish books that are going to sell, but he also is going to sell books that he believes in. And when I had my first early conversations with him, he said to me, my mission, my goal is to publish the books that the authors want to have published. And
Oh,
it
he's
doesn't mean
terrific.
that, because there was all this talk before we found Mike, how are we going to do this? People, publishing companies don't care who you are. They care if they can sell a book.
Mm.
So someone who is established, like a Stephen King or a Dean Koontz or any of your top name authors, are going to get a publishing contract right out of the gate, because the second they put a Stephen King book out on the shelves, it's going to fly off the shelves. They're going to make money. That's what they care about, because that is their business. Linda and I could write letters to publishing companies until the cows came home. And what happens is that we are at that point, not anymore, but at that point in time, we were unknowns. So we were high risk. We were considered high risk. Yes, Bob Crane is somebody who is of extreme importance in as far as, yes, he has an unsolved murder. Yes, scandal, so on and so forth. He's a celebrity. But Linda and I did not have the
Oh, we didn't exist.
we didn't exist. That's exactly right. And so a mainline publisher would not give us the time of day, strictly because, one, they are looking at security. They want a secure contract signed with somebody. Very, very rarely are you going to go, and it's not that it doesn't happen, it's just rare that it does, that you just jump in on board with a mainline publisher. The other option was to self-publish, which then ties our hands. And it's not a bad thing to self-publish, but when you self-publish, a lot of integrity can be lost, especially when you're dealing with a biography, because then it becomes an unvetted piece of work. So we sent our book back to people who contributed for them to review their sections, to make sure that their sections, what we were quoting them as, that we interpreted it correctly and that we wrote around it correctly, so that the whole perception, the whole package of what they were saying was meeting their approval, that we were not putting words in their mouth, that we were not making them out to say something that maybe we misheard, or maybe they didn't say it correctly, or whatever. And we sent that out. And then following that, we had a pre-run of the book that we sent out to reviewers. And if for those of you who have bought the book, you'll see that there is a whole stretch of people who gave reviews of the book from Broadway World and from various people, other authors who reviewed our book and said, this is like breaking the lid off of Bob Crane. This is the definitive biography. This is it. And his family has said that to us as well. Scotty has certainly said it to us. Karen, his daughter, has said, this is like the Bible of my dad.
Or the digest. She has to check the digest.
Mm-hmm. And so, so this is his definitive story. And it doesn't take away from the kids and their memories of him, their memoirs. They have their memories, and they are entitled to their memories, and they are entitled to share those memories. But what we did was we cast the net out to a larger pool. And we have discovered that Bob was so different than how he has been presented in The Murder of Bob Crane, in Autofocus, in tabloid news reports. And it's not to say that there aren't elements of truth in there, but that the twisting and the fabricating that happen around those elements of truth paint a very different picture of who that actual person was. And that is why we get so passionate. That is why we get so angry. And that is why this particular episode is going to be over 2 hours long. So we're going to end the story because
though it's not that we love everything about him.
That's right.
I mean, I had no particular opinion one way or the other when I started the book, aside from thinking that what I was seeing, which was just death, sex,
right,
was just not a whole story. And as a reporter and journalist, I just thought that's not fair and said, let's tell the whole story. Are there parts of his life that I disagree with? Sure. There are sections of this book that he did with certain parts of his career or whatnot. I remember sitting one night, and I may have said this before, but I literally just cried. Mm-hmm. I felt like I knew him so well at this point, based on what everyone was telling us about him, that I could see him self-destructing. And that upset me so much. But was I going to leave that out of the telling? Of course not, because no one is perfect. But, and I don't mind hearing that someone is not perfect. I minded having to be the person who told people that he wasn't perfect. But I did appreciate also getting to tell people that he was okay. But it was really important that we see that he was a whole person, and a whole person makes mistakes, and a whole person makes bad choices, and a whole person has good things to them. And we never got to see all of that.
No.
And that's why I got so passionate in the beginning, and why we continued to be so passionate later on. There just was never, it was one dimension all the way. And that was not going to happen with us. No way.
And,
no way.
You know, and as far as being perfect, nobody is perfect. My very dear friend Cliff told me when he read the book, he said that Bob Crane was not perfect, but he was perfectly human. And I think that that really sums up anybody. We're all human, and Bob was human as well. I'm going to end this with the last quote that Bob probably said in public before he died. And on June 27th, 1978, and I'm reading this from the book, in Scottsdale, Arizona, Bob Crane sat down with reporter Jim Ingolio, and the two men began an interview. It was to be the last media interview Bob would give, but neither the reporter nor the star could have known what was to occur within the next 48 hours. He talks about his impending divorce. He says he wishes they weren't going through with it. He talks about the National Enquirer doing a scathing article based on Patty's complaint that they got from courthouse records. He talks about Scotty and his other children, and how it's a sad situation and how all of his children will be affected. But Bob was in good spirits, and he had a positive outlook. According to Ingolio, his jovial wit and sunny personality came shining through. And despite his personal troubles, Bob had been hopeful about the future. And he laughed through most of their conversation. He laughed his way through most of their conversation. And it was at that point that Bob said to Ingolio that if he should ever write his own autobiography, he would title it Laughing All the Way to the Grave. And that's the last chapter of the book. We call it Laughing All the Way to the Grave, because that sums up Bob. That sums up his desire to always look to the positive. We all go through things. I'm divorced. I've had my ups and downs. Linda, you've had your ups. And we all, as people, have, as human beings, our ups and downs. We struggle and we try to get through them. Bob always looked to the positive. He wanted to overcome his addiction. We can't know if he would have, but given that Bob was so driven towards success, I want to believe that he would have at least tried very, very hard to break free from it. But there isn't an autobiography that Bob could have written, because within 48 hours, he was dead. It becomes a glare. His murder, the fact that it is unsolved, the sexual addiction that makes for scandal in the tabloids, in all other places. It sells. His name just becomes synonymous with humility and shame. And this is what we fight. And Linda, this whole legacy, you and Dee and me, we are here to help bring his legacy to what it should be, with the help of all the people that we did interview.
The people that knew him best.
Yes.
And I am talking about knew him best as in were closest to him. His son, Scott, his daughter, Karen, his school friend, Charlie, Jim, his cousin.
Yes.
All say the same thing. I think Scott said it really well at one point. He said, I think the most important thing is he didn't have a dark side.
Yes.
And autofocus did a brilliant job of making him look so dark. He was the guy who always thought there was a pony in the next room. Mm-hmm. He was the guy who always tried to see the positive. He was a guy who always wanted to be the family man, to help people. He loved to be excited. If you believe in what you're doing, you do it, and you do your best, and you've got to try. You've got to try, and you have to try and make yourself better. You have to try and make life better for yourself and for the people around you. And he did all of that.
Yes.
He failed at a lot of things. So do we. But you know what his failure at a lot of things means? It means he tried a lot of things.
That's right.
And not a lot of us can actually say that. And so we need to start looking more at, and I go back to Joe Cosgrove here.
I was just going to say, yes.
We need to look at the Parthenon.
Yes.
And I think we've said that on our podcast before, that Joe Cosgrove, who was a lovely man and one of the first people to greet Bob into Los Angeles,
yes,
said people are focusing on the specks on the Parthenon. He was a whole person and they keep picking at the specks. It's time to look at him and see the Parthenon.
And I'm looking right at his quote right here that we have published in the book. And this is exactly what Joe told us. Everybody has a dark side. Everybody thinks ugly thoughts. Everybody has a history to his or her life. Let's not paint Bob's life by, what shall we say, the moments in his life. I say these things that are the flaws are like specks on the Parthenon. Let's look at the Parthenon and let's not look at the specks. Let's lift our eyes up to the man's eyes and soul and life and not look down on the gutter.
Oh, he's just brilliant.
So with that, as we come up to June 29th, it is a day where radio stations and TV shows and apps or whatever that keep track of what happened on this date in whatever year, it'll show up that June 29th, 1978 was the day Bob Crane was murdered. And there will be little blips here and there about how his murder's unsolved and how he is involved in sex and, you know, all the scandal and on and on. What we ask is that you look beyond that and get to know him for who he was as a real person, as a whole person. He only lived 49 years. He was just shy of his 50th birthday. So he's now younger than we are. Linda, you, me, yeah, which doesn't seem possible.
Speak for yourself, no, of course.
But he died a young man.
Oh, yeah.
Pack a lot of life into those 49 years. More than what most people could ever dream of accomplishing in their lifetime. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And I hope that you have enjoyed this episode. I hate to say enjoy because it's not very happy, but it does provide you insight into what we have come to learn and why we wrote the book and why we continue to do what we do for Bob Crane. And not just for Bob, but also for his family and his friends and those who cared greatly for him. It's important to them as well. So this is Carol Ford. I thank you very much. And I hope you are staying safe, staying healthy. And Linda?
You've said everything I was going to say. I didn't get a word in there.
That's okay, go ahead.
This is what we do, people. This is what we do. Carol's absolutely right. You can hear from the way we talk and the way we talk to each other how and why this book came. And I think that's just as important for you folks to understand as you read or as you hear things about Bob. Use a discerning mind and think about him as a whole person. And that's so important. And honestly, if you have any questions, we're findable on Facebook. We're findable on Twitter. We're in all kinds of places. And we want you to understand Bob as well as we have tried to understand him through the people that we've spoken with. And if you have questions or there are things that you'd like us to address in a podcast, please let us know. Because as you can tell, this is a topic that we don't have any issues continuing with. Bob was very important to us. He was important to so many people, and he impacts so many people even now. And we are happy to share anything we can with you, because that's what it's always been about. Stay safe, everyone. Enjoy your day.
Take care, stay safe, and we'll see you back here for the next episode. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Flipside, the true story of Bob Crane is owned and produced by Carol M. Ford Productions. All rights reserved. No portion of this podcast may be used without written permission. For archived episodes of this podcast and to learn more about our work about Bob Crane, visit voteforbobcrane.org. That's vote, the number 4, bobcrane.org. You can also subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, and our hosting site, Spreaker, and various other podcast delivery services.